Okay, so what we're going to be doing is just doing a brief run through of kind of how to set up Unity and create like a very basic sort of first person game. When you open, hopefully, when you downloaded Unity, you probably downloaded Unity Hub. And this is kind of a new thing by Unity in the last couple of years. It allows us manage projects a little bit easier than we did in the past, and it allows us have like multiple installs of the engine. If you're seeing here, if it's telling you like there's no version installed or something like that, you can click on installs here and you can click add and you can add like a different version of the engine there. But if you have 2020.2.f1, you should be fine. There shouldn't be an issue there. So that's basically, and this will show you like what the current install versions are. There's Unity Community, which you can jump into and you can see some of that stuff. The Unity Answers is often very useful, but like normally if you search Google and explain your problem into Google, it'll link to a Unity Answers or a Unity forum post of someone kind of dealing with the same issue. That's what I tend to find helps works the best. And then there is the learn section. So this is just kind of some basics you can learn. We're not going to worry too much about these projects because we're hopefully going to be doing things like those projects ourselves. But if you're wondering about like the interface and stuff like that, or like specific aspects of the engine, you can click in here to tutorials and it'll give you some sort of basic things here of like timeline, tracks, working with scripts. And it links here to like there's more resources on unity.com/learn. And I think Unity Learn is free at the minute for students. Okay, so you can find all that stuff there, and there's a good bit of stuff there you can check out. Like if you want editor essentials, basic one there. So like learning about the different parts of the editor, prefabs, navigating the editor. This is version 2019.1 and 2. It'll be pretty much the same for the current version of Unity. Okay, so if you're wondering about any things about the interface, you can click that and it'll hopefully kind of lead you to the kind of things you're looking for. So we're gonna start off and create a very simple 3D project just with a first person controller, which allows us move around the world. And then we're also gonna use Pro Builder to create like some simple sort of assets for that world. Okay, so I'm gonna click here and create a new project. I get to decide where this is going, and I'm gonna put this into, I have a game dev folder here. I'm just putting it there, and I'm gonna call this project let's say first person basics. And then I'm gonna go with 3D for this. If we're doing a 2D game, we're gonna use the 2D template. These pipelines allow us to do kind of nicer graphics and stuff like that, but they come along. We will be using them in a while, like in maybe 3 or 4 weeks, that kind of way when we come back to 3D. For now, we're just going to go with basic 3D because it's a little bit more straightforward as to how we set up projects and stuff. And it's more similar to a lot of the information you'll find online is based on the sort of 3D style project. We're going to hit create, and this is going to, Unity's going to just work in the background and create the project. So what Unity is doing here is it's basically creating a folder on the hard drive, and it's populating that folder with just like some template files and some project basics that we're going to need to get started. When Unity opens up, it basically looks like this. Okay, and the first time you open it, you're going to have this sort of layout. The first thing to say is that like up here you've all your like start file. We'll be going through these basically as we go along, but they're similar to anything you might use in Windows or Mac, like similar sort of layout. These controls here are all about like movement and manipulation of objects within the scene view here, which this window here that says scene at the top of the tab, that's our scene view. And that's really what they're for, and we'll be kind of playing around with that, especially as we use Pro Builder today. Then over here in the inspector this is where like any object we select, it's going to give us information about it. So if I select the main camera over here in the hierarchy, and I'll explain that in a second, but if I select the main camera, it's going to show me I've got the main camera selected. This little tick beside it means it's enabled, as in it's working in the scene. If I tick that, it's disabled, and you'll see the little gizmo for it disappears. Okay, so that's just what that is. It's tagged as main camera, which is a thing we'll see when we get on to making the mini golf game. That's kind of a functionality we're going to use. Every game object in Unity has a transform component, which represents its position in 3D space, its rotation in space, and its scale. Okay, so every game object, everything that exists within the scene needs to have a position, rotation, and scale. Even if its position is 0, 0, 0, rotation 0, 0, 0, and scale is 0, 0, 0, it still needs to exist in space. Then, to understand, I suppose, the core concept of how everything in Unity works is that we have game objects. And I'm just going to come up here where it says game object, and I'm going to create an empty game object, and you'll see it appears here in the hierarchy. Now, if I select this empty game object, as I mentioned, it has these elements here, and then it has a transform component. Okay, so the components basically represent every kind of individual pieces of functionality. Okay, so a camera is basically nothing but an empty game object that has a camera component and an audio listener component. Okay, if we didn't want to hear audio in the scene, we can remove this audio listener component and it's no issues. It's not going to cause any issues with how the camera renders. If we remove the camera component, it's going to mean we can't like record, or like we can't use that as a camera anymore. Or even if I disable the camera component, it means it's not. If I press play now, presumably it's going to say, yeah, cool. So if I press play on the engine, it tells me basically that there's no cameras rendering the scene. Okay, so these components, most of them, other than transform, most of them can be toggled on and off. So you can enable them and disable them. And we can use scripts to access these and enable and disable them. Inside many of these components, we'll have options and settings. And even when we create our own, we're going to have our own kind of functionality we can use there. Okay, so we're not going to worry too much about this, but like if I change, if you right click on the scene view, you're going to see an eyeball and the kind of what represents the arrow keys show up, or the WSD keys, and you can navigate around the scene using that. Okay. If I like lose track of something, so I'm way over here and I want to be like, where's my main camera again? I can just select it, hover my mouse over the scene view and press F, and it's going to focus in on that object. Okay, so now I can look around that. Cool. And so there's my camera. If you're familiar with film or anything like that, or like you understand the idea of like that this basically is a virtual camera, it still behaves similarly to a real camera in the world. So some of the things it has is, I suppose one thing I'm going to show is like as we tweak these variables here, they can change within the game world. So as I change this field of view, I can make it like a basically like 180-degree field of view, which kind of you can probably see in the camera preview here. It like creates this weird distorted effect. Or I can create like a field of view that is almost 0, and it's this really tight camera. Can't remember what that was. I can just undo to bring that back to what it was at the start, 60. And like all these things, anything that you see here, we can basically access through code. Okay, so we've access to it in our code. So coming back to the hierarchy, I think is the other thing I mentioned, and that basically represents everything that exists within our scene. So we're currently in, if you look at the top of the editor, it tells us we're in sample scene, which is an empty scene that Unity creates with every game project. We're in sample scene, it has a main camera, a directional light, and a game object. Our hierarchy basically represents everything within the scene or this level of the game. So this scene has a camera, directional light, game object. If we like have a game where we're shooting people and we generate bullets at runtime, then they're going to show up in the hierarchy. If we destroy something, it's going to be removed from the hierarchy. The hierarchy basically represents everything that it is currently within our scene or level. Now, the hierarchy basically represents our scene, like what we're currently working on and what we're moving through. But then the project folder represents the overall project, basically everything that exists within the game and everything in the game we've access to. So by default, this project just has a sample scene. Okay, but we can create new folders here. So let's say if I create a folder and call this, let's say prefabs, and I'm gonna just, yeah, okay. So that's a folder called prefabs. I can click into that. I'm gonna just rename this just prefab example. And if I drag this into that folder, this becomes something I can use in the project. So if I now save the scene by hitting Control S and I go File, New Scene, I create a basic built-in scene, create, I can now drag this into that scene. Okay, so you'll see here it appears blue in the hierarchy, and that means basically it's a prefab. It has like functionality that we can tweak and change, and it'll change across different instances. So if I save the scene, I'm going to Control S and save the scene. I'm going to call this test scene. And now if I double click the prefab, we open up the prefab view, and like we're just looking at the prefab itself. And I can now add a component. So if I add, let's say, a rigid body component, use gravity, and save this prefab, Control S. I'm going to go back. And now if I press, I'm going to just select this. And if I press play, can't see it there, but you can see it here. Basically, the prefab is falling through space. Okay, that game object is falling, but it's falling quicker than I can move to catch it, basically, to see it. Okay. If I then go back to, because it's a prefab, if I go back to sample scene, say in sample scene there, and press play, that game object is still falling through space. Okay, and you can see that over here in the position in the inspector, it's falling. Or if we select the scene view and press F, as I said, we're going to focus on it, but it's falling pretty quick. So because it's a prefab, we can change and modify its behavior, and changing that behavior will work across multiple scenes. So if we have a player and we want to change their run speed, that player should be a prefab, so that if we change the run speed in one place, it updates across all the levels. And that's kind of, prefabs are these chunks of game object functionality, basically. Cool. So I'm going to jump back into this scene. I'm going to delete out this prefab example because I don't really need it. And then I'm going to go shown. Yeah, okay, cool. So this is the scene view. You've seen when I press play up here, which just basically runs the game. You've seen that it switches to the scene view, basically. Or sorry, to the game view. So if I go here, scene, and press play. Okay, so it switches to this view. Now, one thing we're going to do is we're going to rearrange. We can rearrange all these windows and have them kind of be a bit more convenient or a bit more useful for us. So, yeah, okay, we'll do that straight away. So what I want to do is kind of have a layout that suits me a bit better. So I'm going to move the hierarchy over here beside the inspector. I want to put the project folder underneath the hierarchy. It's fine if you like it like this. I don't love the way this this project folder looks. You can select one column layout, and I find that much easier to use and navigate and stuff. Okay, so we can open those up and we can see what's there, and it's kind of a normal-ish folder structure. Then I am going to move the game view over to here. Drag this down. So this is kind of the layout I tend to like. I might actually move the console to there. That's maybe a bit better. I'm also going to change this from free aspect. I'm just going to set it to 16:9 widescreen. Okay, and that's going to show me the game screen. And that means just every time I hit play, it's not going to like switch between tabs to show me the live game view and stuff. Now, one thing to know is in Unity, we can make changes. Okay, so we can like rotate this camera. If I select this rotate tool up here and scene view, as I rotate the camera, basically that changes. Okay, so I can rotate the camera now. The camera's upside down. If I press play, it just resets. Okay, so changes almost always, and I'll point out the examples where this isn't the case, but almost always when we make changes in play mode, they get reverted. And this can be very frustrating because sometimes you'll accidentally end up in play mode and you'll be like, okay, cool, I'm going to build out a level and I'm going to put like a cube here and I'm going to move this like this and like I'm going to scale this, rotate this maybe a little and scale it. You know, I'm going to build up basically my level design or something like that. And I realize I'm in play mode and I press play and I lose those changes. And like this often is much more than that. There's a useful built-in feature of the editor that lets us tint the editor so that it changes color a little when we're in play mode, and it just serves as a useful reminder that we're in play mode. Okay, so I'm going to go File, or sorry, Edit. I think it's in Preferences here. Sorry. Yeah, cool. Inside an Edit, Preferences, Colors, and Play Mode Tint. At the minute, this tint is basically nothing, so we can just do this. And I generally like to go for a nice horrible purple so that I know it's playing. And now if I press play, you'll see the whole editor turns purple, and it's much harder to not realize you're in play mode. Okay. I'm going to make that less obnoxious for the so that it's picked up a bit better in the recording. Don't know how much less obnoxious that'll be. Okay, I think that's a bit better. Okay, so that basically allows us just kind of as a rule of thumb see the way that works. We can then, with this layout that we're probably pretty happy with because we have a nice big scene view which is where we're moving things around. We can see the console, which is where we'll see error messages and things like that, which is often useful as we get into more complex projects. We can see the hierarchy, which is everything in our scene, and we can see the project, which is everything that exists within our game project we have access to. And then we have the inspector here. Okay. So that's a nice layout, and I'm pretty happy with that. So I'm going to go over here to layout, and I'm going to hit save layout. And I'm going to just call this like John or something like that. And that means if I end up going for like a different layout at some stage, I can just come back to the John layout and it's there for me if I need it. Okay, so it's just a useful way to be able to access things and use things and tweak things basically. And it means we can kind of save those defaults. So that's the basics of the editor. One thing I probably didn't really show that much is if we go game object, 3D object, and I'm going to create a cube, is moving this around. So you can come up here and there's this pan tool that lets us pan the scene view camera. There's this move tool that lets us move the currently selected object. There's a rotate tool that lets us rotate it. And there's a scale tool that lets us scale it up. This here is like a rect tool, and it's mostly useful if we're working with like 2D sprites and stuff. It kind of allows us to do some sort of 2D manipulation. It's not the most useful thing when you're working in 3D. And then this is like a single widget that allows us to do moving, scaling, and rotating. And then there's a tool here that lets us like edit the box collider basically, so we can change where something will collide with this box, but we won't worry too much about that. The main ones we'll be using are move, rotate, and scale. Instead of using the hand tool to pan, we can just hold down the middle mouse button and we can pan the whole thing around our screen. And if we lose it, we can hit F and we'll focus in on it. Okay. Instead of going up here every time, we can instead press W on the keyboard, E and R. W is movement, E is rotation, and R is scale. We can scale it inverse and stuff like that. Okay, and they're useful tools. Definitely know in terms of hotkeys, W, E, and R are really useful hotkeys to have and to use all the time. And like it allows us just kind of tweak things the way we want. Okay, so I'm going to delete that out. And what we're going to do is get started with like a first person controller and get some kind of first person movement working within this game. So I'm going to go here and I'm going to go to the asset store. Okay, and the asset store used to pop up in a separate window here, but we can open the browser basically from the menu. If we tick this, it means anytime we click window asset store, it's going to open up Chrome or whatever our browser is. And we can hit search online. And I'm going to search for an asset called first person all-in-one. I don't know what's happening with my keyboard. Every time I type. Cool. So it's showing up here anyway under this quick look. It's grayed out for me because I've already purchased it. But basically, you can go here. It's called First Person All-in-One. I have a link on the Brightspace to this. It's a useful first-person controller. It gives us functionality we want. And later on in the module, we'll look at creating our own controllers. But this one is a useful starting point. It's a slightly more complex topic that we want to get into in kind of week 1 and 2. And we hit open in Unity. And we might want to hit here, always allow Asset Store to open links in the Unity editor. And we click Open Unity Editor. Let's go to fetch the package for us. So it just sometimes takes a minute for this window here is called the Package Manager. And it basically represents a lot of the additional functionality or the sort of assets and things like that we can use to work on and improve our project, basically. You might need to be signed into the editor. And if you do, you probably had an account when you downloaded it. So hopefully that all works, basically. We'll wait for this to upload. So it says if you search First Person All-in-One, this one is definitely free. It should be on the Brightspace, but so it's like this First Person All-in-One package. There are different first person packages that show up when you look for them. I don't know. I'm just gonna hit this refresh list here because this is taking longer than it should. Okay, cool. So this has updated all the different packages I have like access to and stuff like that. So you might have much less here, and that's just from different projects and stuff I've worked on. But what I want to do is select here in this window, First Person All-in-One. It gives me the version of it. I hit download, and it's going to download it. And then I hit import, and that's going to bring it into the project. I'm going to untick where it says demo scene here because I don't really want that. I also don't want the documentation or the read. You can import those if you want. They're just like not that useful to me right now. If you want to see it like working in some of the demo scenes, but like we're going to be able to set this up pretty quickly. Now that's imported into our game, and we'll see it here. It shows up in our assets folder, First Person All-in-One pack, First Person All-in-One. And I'm going to close this asset store window. Okay. Once I expand out these folders here, I can see the First Person All-in-One asset, and I can drag that into the scene view. Now, one thing that's important to know here that's going to cause an issue is that at the minute we have 2 cameras, and they're both tagged as main camera. We'll see the issue that causes in a second. So I'm going to create a game object. I'm going to create a 3D object. I'm going to do a cube. Oh, that's not what I want. I'm going to rename this ground. I can click this 3D gizmo up here in the top right of the screen to get like a top-down view, which is often quite useful, especially so that I can see like where this stuff is. So I'm just going to like scale this up something like that so that it covers most of the ground. And then I'm going to do this. And I want to make sure that this First Person All-in-One is above that. So now if I press play. Okay, cool. So in my case, it has picked this asset, but sometimes depends. If you try this, you might find that it picks the other game camera here, and it's a pretty simple fix. That we don't need this camera anymore, so we can just select it and hit delete on the keyboard. That get rid of it out of our scene, and it means there's no issue with ending up with multiple scenes and stuff like that. Okay. So, or with multiple cameras, like, and it's trying to render one and it picks the wrong camera or something. So we should try and make sure we have one camera active at a time. There are some exceptions to that, and we can talk about that a little bit. Like if you're doing VR, you'll end up with 2 cameras because you've got a camera for each eye and they're offset by a small amount. But in the case of standard first person, it's basically like this. And thanks to this first person controller asset now, we can jump into the scene, we can run around, can press space to jump, can hold down shift, and it's going to do a sprint. One thing I'm going to do here is if I go over to the game view, I'm going to click this button that says maximize on play. And this is a button sometimes you'll want to turn on and off, but I'm going to have it on for now. If I press play, it's going to maximize the game view. Okay, and that just lets me see kind of a bigger version of the game. If you don't want that on all the time, but sometimes you want to make it bigger, and you want to like kind of maximize that game view, when you press play, you can hit these 3 dots, and this applies to any of the tabs. You can hit maximize, and that'll maximize it as well. And if you want to minimize it again, you can untick maximize, and it lets you kind of work around. One thing to know is that when you're in this first person view, you'll end up with your mouse locked to the view. So if you need to get your mouse out of that, you press escape, and your mouse then can move around the editor. And once you click on this window again, it should be working, but it's not for some reason. Normally when you click in that view, it will let you get back to the game. Cool. So that's our first person. It's a basic way to set it up, but it lets us get the basics working. The next thing we want to do is kind of create an environment that we can move around. And for that, you know what? I'm going to stop this video here so that there's a chunk on like understand the Unity interface and putting the first person controller in the level, and then I'll do a short video that's just a separate chunk on using ProBuilder to build up